This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is what happens when a modern state runs out of oxygen and decides the fastest way to survive is to turn off the air for everyone else. Not all at once. Quietly, digit by digit, when prices climb faster than wages, when communication disappears before explanation, when silence becomes policy, something fundamental shifts. And most people don't notice it happening. They just feel it. You are told this is chaos. You are told this is unrest. You are told this is familiar. It isn't, because when a system stops trying to persuade and starts trying to isolate, it is no longer managing dissent. It is managing time. Time before collapse. Time before exposure. Time before the outside world has to decide whether distance is still possible. If you think this is just another uprising, stay with me. Because the danger here isn't what's loud. It's what just went quiet. And once you see that mechanism, you can't unsee what comes next. What actually controls this system now is not ideology. It's not religion. It's not even power in the traditional sense. It's fragility. A fragile system behaves differently. It stops optimizing for legitimacy and starts optimizing for survival. And survival at this stage is no longer about growth. It's about containment. Containment of prices, containment of information, containment of people. When economic pressure becomes permanent instead of cyclical, the system quietly rewires itself. Decision-making narrows. Feedback loops close. Reality becomes an input that must be filtered, delayed, or shut off entirely. That's why personalities suddenly matter less than infrastructure. Why control of networks matters more than control of streets. Why silence becomes more valuable than consent. From the outside, this looks like strength. From the inside, it's triage. And here's the critical shift. Once a system accepts that it cannot fix the underlying problem, it focuses on managing the symptoms indefinitely. That's not stability. That's a holding pattern. And holding patterns don't last forever. They either land or they spiral. To understand which one this is, you have to look at what changed quietly over time. There was a time when pressure produced reform, when rising costs forced adjustment, when discontent triggered negotiation. That time passed slowly, almost politely. The most dangerous changes don't arrive as shocks. They arrive as habits. Before, economic pain was treated as temporary, a cycle, something to ride out. Now it's treated as background noise, permanent, expected, built into daily life. Before, information flowed even during unrest. Now, connectivity itself is conditional, a privilege that can be revoked without explanation. Before, the system reacted after unrest began. Now, it preemptively narrows the space in which unrest can even be seen. This is the silent shift, from response to prevention, from persuasion to insulation. And the public adapts, not because they agree, but because adaptation feels safer than confrontation, until it doesn't. Slow normalization is powerful because it erases comparison. You don't notice what's gone if you're taught not to expect it back. But systems that rely on normalization make a fatal bet. They assume time is neutral, that tomorrow looks like today. History suggests otherwise. Because once the gap between lived reality and official reality gets wide enough, it doesn't close gradually. It snaps. And the first visible snap is never the biggest one. Then comes the moment that breaks the illusion of control. Not a coup, not an announcement, a switch flipped in silence. The internet goes dark. Not briefly, not accidentally, completely. Hours stretch into days. International calls disappear. Outside contact collapses. Even alternative pathways are targeted, jammed, smothered. This is not a technical failure. It's a strategic one. Because when prices rise by 50%, when food costs jump more than 70%, you can argue numbers. You can dispute causes. But when communication itself vanishes, the argument changes. Now the system is no longer responding to anger. It's preventing witness. And that tells you something critical. The leadership is no longer trying to win, it's trying to outlast. Outlast documentation, outlast coordination, outlast memory. Externally, threats escalate. Warnings are issued. Consequences are hinted at. Internally, casualties mount faster than the world can count them. This is the mini crisis most people misunderstand. They see a crackdown, they miss the signal, because when a state chooses isolation over explanation, it's admitting something it cannot say out loud. And once that choice is made, there's no easy way back. The system has crossed a line. What matters now is why. Here's how the system actually works once it reaches this stage. Economic collapse creates pressure. Pressure creates protest. Protest creates visibility. And visibility is the one thing this system can no longer afford. So the mechanism shifts. Instead of fixing the economy, the system externalizes the cost. Inflation isn't solved. It's absorbed by households. Food scarcity isn't reversed. It's normalized. The damage doesn't disappear. It's redistributed downward, quietly, unevenly, until survival becomes individualized. Meanwhile, the state reallocates its remaining strength upward. Security over services, control over competence, isolation over reform. This is why information becomes the primary battleground. Not because words are dangerous, but because synchronization is. When people can't see each other, they can't move together. When they can't verify reality, they're forced to guess. Fear fills the gaps. Who benefits? A leadership buying time. Who pays? Everyone else. In smaller portions, every day. This mechanism doesn't require loyalty. It only requires exhaustion. And exhaustion is effective until it isn't. Because the more pressure the system pushes outward, the less margin it keeps for itself. That's the flaw. And once you see it, you can anticipate what comes next, not as an event, but as acceleration. Then the tempo changes. Faster, sharper, less forgiving. Defections begin. Quiet at first, then visible. Not because ideology shifts, but because risk calculus does. When the cost of staying exceeds the cost of leaving, loyalty becomes negotiable. External pressure intensifies. Warnings harden. Threats are no longer abstract. They point outward, toward bases, borders, consequences beyond the system itself. Inside, the response tightens again. More force, less bandwidth, shorter windows, fewer explanations. This is no longer about deterrence. It's about compression. The system is trying to shrink the problem faster than it spreads, to localize instability, to keep it containable. But instability doesn't compress cleanly. It leaks. Every shutdown creates workarounds. Every threat invites counters. Every delay raises the stakes. At this point, outcomes stop being managed and start being triggered. And that's the danger of acceleration. The system loses the ability to choose timing. It reacts to momentum instead of shaping it. Nothing here resolves. Nothing pauses. The question is no longer whether the system can hold, it's whether it can slow down what it just set in motion. This is where it reaches you, not as a headline, as a calculation. You feel it when prices stop being numbers and start being decisions. What to skip, what to delay, what risk is acceptable this week. Survival becomes a series of quiet trade-offs, and none of them feel temporary. You are told to be patient. You are told this will pass. You are told not to amplify, but patience is easier when you can speak, when you can compare notes, when you can see that you're not alone. When those channels close, uncertainty does the work of enforcement. This is how pressure becomes personal, not through ideology, but through isolation, through the sense that acting costs more than waiting, and waiting costs more than you can afford. And that's the cruel efficiency of this phase. You don't need mass loyalty. You just need enough people unsure enough to stay still. If this feels familiar, stay with me. Because recognizing the pattern is the first defense against it. What's happening here doesn't stop at borders. It never does. Once isolation becomes policy, it doesn't stay contained. Markets react before governments do. Supply chains flinch. Energy corridors tighten. Insurance premiums rise quietly. Risk gets priced in long before it's announced. And then there's alignment. When a system under pressure trades long-term sovereignty for short-term relief, those deals don't stay local. Ports, infrastructure, logistics, concessions made under duress ripple outward. They change leverage. They shift balance. They invite attention. At the same time, external actors are forced into uncomfortable proximity. Threats aimed outward pull neighbors, allies, and rivals into the same frame. Suddenly, distance is no longer insulation. Neutrality becomes harder to maintain. Information gaps widen internationally, too. When verification disappears, speculation fills the vacuum. Markets overreact. Militaries posture. Miscalculation becomes more likely not because anyone wants it, but because clarity is gone. This is how a domestic pressure loop turns systemic. What began as economic failure becomes strategic uncertainty. What looked internal becomes shared exposure. And here's the unsettling part. Once multiple systems start reacting to the same instability, no single actor controls the pace anymore. Everyone adjusts. No one coordinates. And that's when the future stops looking linear. From here, the future doesn't arrive as a single outcome. It fractures into paths. The first path is adjustment. The system loosens just enough to survive. Pressure is redistributed, controls become more selective, the blackout ends partially, the economy stabilizes barely. Life becomes manageable, not better. The danger doesn't disappear. It's postponed. And postponement feels, briefly, like success. The second path is erosion. Nothing breaks all at once. Trust decays, capacity drains. The system keeps functioning, but thinner each month. More people opt out, mentally, economically, physically. Institutions remain, but they're hollowed. Power still exists, but it's reactive. This is slow failure, the kind that looks calm right up until it isn't. The third path is rupture. Acceleration overwhelms containment. External pressure collides with internal exhaustion. A single trigger miscalculation, overreaction, interruption pushes the system past its ability to absorb shock. Control doesn't fade. It snaps. None of these paths are chosen cleanly. They overlap, they compete, they bleed into each other. What matters is this. Once a system reaches this stage, time stops being a neutral factor. Every delay changes the odds. Every action narrows future options. And the most dangerous assumption now is that the present can simply continue. There's a temptation at moments like this to look for resolution, a turning point, a name, a date, something clean you can circle and say, that's when it changed. But systems like this don't end cleanly. They fray, they strain, they test the limits of how much pressure people can carry before the structure itself starts to fail. What you've been watching isn't a crisis in search of a villain. It's a warning about design, about what happens when economic failure, information control, and external escalation lock into the same loop. The danger isn't that this system collapses tomorrow. It's that it teaches others how to survive collapse longer, how to manage decline, how to mute visibility, how to trade stability for silence. If you're waiting for reassurance, you won't find it here. Because nothing in this pattern suggests comfort is coming. What matters now is attention, sustained, precise, unblinking. Because the moment people stop watching is the moment these systems count on most. If this unsettled you, don't look away. Share it, question it, follow what comes next. Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the part where the consequences start choosing for us.